We welcome you. This is the second of our 3 debates this month, as you probably all know. First, we want to thank our sponsors. Interesting slip there. The Eggs and Issues sponsor, as it has been for the past several years, is the New Hampshire Electric Co-op. The diamond sponsors of the Economic Council include the Glenn Group, the Bank of New Hampshire, and HEB Engineering. And our gift sponsor is Glass Graphics. I would like you just to very politely say thank you. Without their help, we would not be able to put on the programs that we put on year-round, and during the election season, we put on our debates. Most of you in the room know George Epstein. He has been our debate moderator over the last 7 election cycles. He is also town moderator in the town of Madison. He owns Echo Consulting, which is a behavioral health software company. And he's an all-around good basketball player, despite his advancing years. So, George?
Thank you. I'm the slowest living point guard on the face of the earth here. Thank you all for coming, and a special thanks to those who turn off their telephones. That would be very much appreciated. But to both of the candidates for coming, Congresswoman Carol Shea-Porter, Congressman Frank Guinta, really appreciate you joining us here. We recognize we're not the largest population body in the state of New Hampshire, and we do appreciate you giving us this attention this morning. I thank you both for coming. I will refer to you both without your titles going forward, just rather with your full names, not to be disrespectful, but just to be even-handed and to save me a few syllables. And I'll ask the audience to withhold their applause, and except for the endings of their opening statements and their closing statements, and allow us to hear as much from the candidates as we possibly can. And I'll hold you all responsible for listening closely to the questions and whether or not the candidates actually answer the questions that are being asked. That's your primary responsibility here, along with showing up at the polls on November 4th to vote for the candidate of your choice. So with that, we have had a coin flip. The winner, loser, it doesn't make any difference. The result is that Carol Shea-Porter will speak first in the opening statements, and that Frank Guinta will speak first in the closing statement. So I'm going to get right to it. It's a 1-minute opening statement from Carol Shea-Porter.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to be here. And of course, Frank and I have met each other before. And so I think it's important to highlight the differences, and you'll hear them as this debate goes on. But I'd like to say that a budget's a moral document. A budget's a statement about what you believe in and who you believe in and why you believe in that. And there were some very different votes in my time, and also different votes for Frank Guinta in his. Frank Guinta voted for a budget that was even more extreme than the Ryan budget, one that Republicans actually had to defeat, because it cut so many programs that are essential. So you can't say that you support treatment for mental health and then vote against it and vote against Medicaid. You can't say that you support education and then vote against it. You can't say that you support equality in budgets and then support the top 1% and give them the tax breaks and land it on the middle class and small businesses to carry the burden. So we have different philosophies here. I believe that you grow the economy by growing the middle class out and by supporting middle class small business and Main Street. And you'll hear the difference during this debate. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate Frank being here and giving me the opportunity and giving him the opportunity to have this great sounding board, because this is our democracy, ideas and then votes. So thank you very much, and I look forward to it.
Thank you. And Frank Guinta, a 1-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you very much to the Chamber for hosting our debate. Thank you, George, for continuing to serve as what I think is probably the most interesting moderator in the state of New Hampshire relative to debates. I've been here many times with you and with Carol, and I welcome the opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, I am running again for Congress because, very simply, I think the country is going in the wrong direction. I think families across the Granite State and across America are desperate for leadership, looking for job opportunity, want to see faith in government restored, want to see action in Washington on behalf of everyday families in America. And I think most people are very disappointed when they see the lack of action and the lack of activity out of our legislative members here in New Hampshire, and they're concerned with what's not going on in Washington, D.C. So I've offered my candidacy again. I want to talk about policy, substance, and issues, and I want to listen above all to the people of this congressional district to do the very best I can to represent your interests in Washington. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Let's start with a topic of particular interest and hot in the news, and that's the Ebola epidemic. Is the Obama administration doing the right thing with regard to the Ebola epidemic? Should travel from West Africa be banned? Should sending military troops to West Africa be part of our policy there? Are we doing the right thing? And we'll start with Frank Guinta.
Well, I don't think that the president is doing enough in terms of leadership for our country or for around the world. We should enact a travel ban. The first primary obligation of this government and this president should be to protect American citizens. And in order to do that, I think you have to minimize the likelihood of the virus coming to the United States. Just yesterday, we had a nurse board a plane after she had called the CDC, asking the CDC if it was okay for her to board because she had Ebola-like symptoms. And CDC did not properly convey to her what she was concerned about and put people on that plane at risk. So I don't see the administration and this president doing their very level best to protect American citizens, and I think that's got to change immediately.
Carol Shea-Porter, 1 minute.
Well, I do think that we need to be more aggressive. I think it's time to stop non-essential travel. We certainly want aid workers and others to be able to travel, but non-essential travel for the three countries would be a very good idea. But, you know, there's a larger discussion here as well, that when Frank Guinta voted and others then voted to cut the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and also National Institute of Health, this has an impact, and so we need these resources to fight now, and we are definitely slipping behind here. So I, too, am horrified by the advice that was given to that nurse. I'm horrified that she even traveled. It seems to me that they should have kept them in a quarantine because they had been exposed. But now we really need to double down on our efforts to do that. So I think a non-essential travel ban is a good idea. I think the temperature taking is pretty astounding. It wasn't done right away. And I think putting people in quarantine when we know they've been exposed is the right thing to do. And it's what we used to do in this country before we had access to so many of the vaccinations that have helped to eradicate some of the diseases we face. We need to get it done.
Thank you. Carol Shea-Porter, what have you done as a congresswoman for our veterans, and what should we be doing going forward for our veterans?
Well, I've done a number of things. I'm very proud of the fact that we now have a new GI Bill of Rights modeled on the GI Bill of Rights that my father had in World War II, and that has helped. Really?
Let's see here.
That was such a brilliant answer.
I'm going to ask you to just lean forward a little bit closer, and let's see if we do better. Could you just say testing?
Testing. Is that better? Testing. Is there a volume?
Is that okay?
No.
Jack, if you could ask our audiovisual people to help us out here. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And we have no control over the volume. Would you like to use my microphone for just a moment while we wait?
That's a good idea.
Come on over here. I think I'll ask you to speak from the middle.
No, I'd rather stay with
Stay right there. Then we're going to be all right.
I could shout for one or two answers while we work it out. Would you like me to do that?
Why don't you do it, but with the microphone over there? Yes. Let's.
Okay.
Start.
Do you hear me if I really raise my voice? Middle child in a big family, I can do it. And a lot of practice. Okay. So when do we start my minute?
Right now.
Okay. I'm very proud of the work that I've done for veterans. I think most people know that I was a military spouse. I'm proud of my husband's service, and he's here in the room right now with me. So clearly, you know, we're committed to veterans and committed to the military. I'm proud of a number of things that I've done. Most recently, that vote to allow veterans to access local care, which has been huge. I introduced that bill initially in 2007. So I'm happy that we're finally doing that. I'm also proud of the fact that we did a new GI Bill of Rights, which helped combat veterans to go to school when they came back and get an education and other benefits. I've worked on a number of other issues protecting soldiers' lungs in Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of the wonderful things about being on the Armed Services Committee is that it's the most bipartisan committee in the House. And we know if we get it wrong, we will hurt the whole nation and could hurt the world. So I've had a lot of legislation passed through there. We only have one bill a year. And I appreciate the fact that with the Republicans heading the Congress and also heading our committee, that they have allowed us, Democrats, to work closely with them and pass our legislation. So more to come, but I'm proud of what I've done there to help veterans and to help military.
Thank you. Frank Guinta, in your time in Congress, what have you done for the military, and what do you believe is necessary for the future?
Well, first, let me thank anyone in the room who has served our country. We live under the blanket of freedom that you have provided, and I think as a result of that, no veteran should have to beg for the benefits that they have earned by serving our country. Two very simple things that I think need to be accomplished in this country. When you talk about a veteran from Conway who's got to travel to Boston for care, it's inexcusable. Not only when I was mayor fighting for a full-service VA hospital in Manchester, but also did that in Congress. Secondly, you should have the choice to either go to that hospital or a hospital of your choice. And it's a very simple process. You get a card, you go to any hospital you so choose. You don't have to complain or fight for that opportunity. Secondly, one of the pieces of legislation that I was able to get signed into law by this president while I was in the minority was protecting Clark's Veterans Cemetery in the Philippines, something very important to families who have soldiers and family members who are laid to rest in that cemetery. Finally, we were able to get something accomplished in a bipartisan way, and I'm very proud of that accomplishment.
Thank you. And thank you both for being very good about adhering to Alan Gould's signs with the amount of time that you have remaining. I appreciate it. It makes my job much easier. A few months ago, the big issue with regard to veterans was the scandalous behavior of the Veterans Administration. Do you believe there is legislation that's necessary to be passed, simply better management on the part of the executive branch of government, or do you think the Veterans Administration, the veterans hospitals should simply be shut down and veterans should have the opportunity to have their medical care paid for by the federal government at wherever they want to go? Frank Guinta.
Well, I don't think you should shut down the VA hospital. I think you should give a veteran a choice of either going to the hospital if they so choose or a hospital within their community of choice. But secondly, it was a failure of leadership by this administration, by Eric Shinseki. I called for his resignation almost immediately when this issue came to light. But the President of the United States knew about this, and Eric Shinseki knew about it almost 5 years ago and did nothing to address it. And you just heard Carol Shea-Porter say that she's on the Committee of Jurisdiction, and there was no oversight going on while she was in office during this 6-year period. You know, we have an obligation not just to legislate, but to provide oversight over the very jurisdictions we have. And in this circumstance, it was an abject failure. There needs to be an Inspector General report completed. There needs to be extreme oversight with relative to the House and the Senate to make sure that this never, ever happens again to a veteran in the United States of America.
Thank you. Carol Shea-Porter, same question.
Well, first let me say I'm not on the Committee of Jurisdiction. There is a Veterans Committee, Frank, and I'm on the Armed Services Committee. Having said that, this clearly was a disgrace, and we did take some steps to fix it. I'm very proud of the vote to fix this. We also voted to say that even if you're in the senior executive service, you can be removed for anything like that without having to go through a long process. In other words, they lost their protection so that we could respond faster if this happened. You know, the epicenter was in Arizona. And I don't blame Senator McCain, and I don't think it's fair to blame President Obama unless we share the responsibility there about what happened to these veterans. They hid this. We have to remember that this was hidden. All these records were hidden, and it was a whistleblower that brought this forward. And once we saw this, we acted on it. So this is the reason that now people will be able to go to a local clinic if they choose to. But the VA still does a wonderful job, and it's not fair to tag all of these Veterans Affairs workers with the same brush. I have been to the VA in Manchester a number of times. I go regularly. They work extremely hard. They really care about those people there. So we shouldn't criticize the workers at the VA. There were some that were rotten, and we had to do something to take care of that.
Can we stay on this subject? Or?
Let's go 30 more seconds, if you could.
With all due respect, you've served in Congress for 6 years. You talk to New Hampshire about your passion for veterans. Everywhere you go, you talk about this passion. And you say that it's not fair to blame the President of the United States. The President of the United States was notified about this 5 years ago. Eric Shinseki was publicly notified about it 5 years ago and claimed at that time that he would address the issue. And it's not just Arizona. It started because we found out that they were hiding documents. And it has gone throughout the entire country now. Almost every single state is identifying areas where there were lines for veterans for basic services. That has to stop, and at some point, someone should be held accountable.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
Well,
Carol
thank you for saying somebody should be held accountable, because before I got to Congress, the chairman, the Republican chairman of the Veterans Committee went and said there's not enough funding for the VA. And what they did was they removed him from his committee. So you are right. This has been a problem, a financial problem for a long time. And we had to find the wrongdoing, and I'm glad that we did. But I called for Shinseki to resign also. He's a good man. He served his country. He was wounded. But I called for him also to step down so we could turn the page and start again. But you cannot point out one person or one individual who's responsible. It was a failure of the system, and it was a failure for some to react quickly.
I'm going to move to another topic. Carol Shea-Porter, 1 minute on the topic of income inequality. Our economists tell us that both salaries and wages are diverging. People are being paid on the low end, on the high end, and household wealth in particular is diverging to a degree that it hasn't since the 1920s. First of all, do you think that's a problem? And secondly, what does a member of Congress do about it?
That's a huge problem, and I've been talking about that. I keep saying the middle class is stumbling and the poor have fallen. And we need to make sure that corporations don't get to skip out their taxes, that the tax code needs to be reformed. I don't agree with Frank Guinta, who says that the IRS needs to be abolished, because we wouldn't have any accounts receivable for this country. But we do need to reform this so that it's fair. And I indicated before that Frank Guinta voted not only for the Ryan budget, but the budget that was offered before. It was the Tea Party budget, the Republican Study Committee budget, which would give tax cuts 30% to the wealthiest in this country. It's not acceptable. We have to make this fairer now, and this whole election is about fairness. We've been watching this happen for quite a while now. We need reform. We need to make sure that we pay attention to small businesses, that we give them more tax breaks. I've introduced a number of bills and co-sponsored bills to do that as well. And we need to make sure that all corporations pay their fair share. We also can't allow them to fly under another flag. Some of them, including Walgreens, which changed their mind, fortunately, tried to fly under another flag to reduce their tax burden. Main Street pays their taxes, middle class pays their taxes, and I think that multinational corporations and American corporations need to also.
Frank Guinta, are you concerned about income inequality? If so, what would you do about it?
Yeah, I think it's a concern that every American has because of the sheer fact that for the last 6 years, this economy has been stagnant at best. With all due respect, Carol, you've been in office for 6 years, and for that bulk of time, families here in Conway and around the district continue to struggle. The average weekly wage today isn't any different for the average family than it was 6 years ago. The labor participation rate is at the lowest it's ever been, 62.7% in this country. The fact that we look at the unemployment numbers, whether you want to look at the U3 number at 6% or the real unemployment number, the U6 number, which is over 12%. This is unacceptable. This is absolutely unacceptable. And there's a number of things that you can do. Number one, you've got to balance the budget so there's predictability with our job creators. Secondly, you've got to reduce the regulatory requirements on our job creators. Third, you have to have overall tax reform that hasn't happened since 1986. So job creators have more ability to create those jobs in this country. The government has been in the way for the last 6 years of the very small businesses that we're talking to right now, and you haven't come up with one concrete solution or one legislative action in your entire 6-year period to help those job creators grow jobs here in the Granite State or around the country.
I knew I shouldn't have complimented you on stopping right on time. We will, and in fact, I'm going to ask you to delve further into the issue of balancing the budget. You clearly are concerned about the need to balance the budget. The gap is $500 billion right now, roughly $500 billion. That's a lot of money. Do you not have to both raise taxes and reduce spending in order to fill a gap of $500 billion? If so, what specific things are you going to cut that are going to result in those savings, and what specific taxes are you going to raise in order to fill the gap on the revenue side?
Well, I voted and supported and continue to support a balanced budget amendment because it's clear that people in Washington don't know how to balance their books. When I was mayor, I balanced budgets all 4 years and actually cut taxes and had surpluses. There are ways that and I did it with working with a majority of Democrats. You don't need to raise taxes in order to grow revenue. What you can do is have pro-growth economic policies that are going to encourage all sorts of business to come back to the United States, to come here to the Granite State. There's some very simple things you can do through tax reform or repatriation. Now, what would I cut? There was a GAO report that just came out. It says there's $150 billion in waste at the federal level on the discretionary side of spending. $150 billion, that's 15% of what's being spent, and they didn't even look at every single agency. So why don't we start with eliminating the $150 billion in waste and apply that to our deficit? But that is not happening in Washington right now. The expenditures continue to grow, and the long-term debt continues to grow almost to $18 trillion now.
Can you give us an example of how you get to, if you take 30 seconds, how you get to $150 billion in waste? Where are tens of billions of dollars to be saved in waste? What would you cut that would eliminate that waste?
Well, for example, I served on the Transportation Committee, and we took 70 different duplicative programs and reduced them so we can be more effective and more efficient with your dollars, trying to get more dollars into the direct programs and to the direct states that require additional resources. The amount of bureaucracy that you see just in one agency, we were able to reduce 70 programs. And we did that bipartisanly, by the way, in committee.
1 minute first, and I promise I'll have a follow-up for you. Do you think it's important that we balance the budget? If so, how specifically in terms of increased taxes and reduced spending would you achieve that?
Let's go back to Frank Guinta's comments about my 6 years, and he didn't want to say that he was in 2 of those years between that time period, and I think that's pretty critical because you didn't change anything. When you were on the Transportation Committee, you voted to cut Tiger grants, which builds infrastructure in this country, and created other issues, but we'll deal with that next. But the reality here is that when I came into Congress, we were already deeply in debt because we had a president that cut taxes while he ran 2 wars, and everybody knows that's true. So in 2008, while it was still a Republican president, the economy crashed. Everybody remembers October 2008, and we lost millions and millions of jobs. And in that time period, we have been rebuilding those jobs. So here's some statistics that I think make a difference, that the unemployment rate is lower now. We've had about 55, 56 months of steady job growth, that we have seen the situation get better. Here's what's wrong. What's wrong, and all you have to do, and USA Today talks about it, look at who's in the full recovery and who's not. The middle class wages are stagnant. And Frank, if you voted to raise the minimum wage, that would help. Then they wouldn't be eligible and needing so many other programs to help them. We have people who can work 2 or 3 jobs and still not make enough to take care of their families. And we'll get into health care next. The fact that they couldn't afford health care.
We will if I allow you to get into health care. I promise I will. 30 more seconds, though. $500 billion gap. You raise taxes, you cut spending. How are you going to come up with $500 billion?
Well, we know that this year the deficit has dropped dramatically. And the reason the deficit has dropped dramatically is the economy is recovering. And at the end of 2012, the Congress came together. Frank didn't vote for it, but the Congress came together and raised taxes on the top 1%. And so you put that in, and you put the fact that the economy is recovering, and the deficit is much smaller than it's been. So we need to continue doing that. We need to, as I said, we need to collect money from corporations that use our first responders, they use our military that keeps this country safe, they use our education with their employees. They are full participants except for one thing. They're not paying taxes, and we need to change that tax code so we don't have so many corporations that are paying zero income tax. We can't hit the middle class anymore, and small businesses, they've been whacked too hard.
Well, let's stay just one more time. So as long as we sort of keep doing what we're doing and keep chipping away little by little, we're going to ultimately be okay and balance the budget. How long is that going to take?
Well, it depends on what legislation comes out. We are not in control of the floor. The floor of the House of Representatives is run by Speaker Boehner and the Republicans. They are the only ones that can put anything on the floor. They have not put jobs bills on the floor. I support an infrastructure bill that would get people working in rehab structure. But we can do this, and there's plenty of ways that we need to be more efficient. There's plenty of waste and fraud and inefficiency. So we can't ignore that either. But it can't be just one approach. It has to be a multi-pronged approach to doing this.
Frank Guinta, with additional efficiencies and sort of continuing what we're doing right now, that $500 billion will be taken care of. I don't need big tax increases or painful spending cuts. How long is it going to take for us to balance the budget that way?
We can do this as quickly as possible in within a few years to get a balanced budget. It absolutely does depend on if you have the right people who are willing, number one, to vote for a balanced budget amendment. And I'm not sure that Carol Shea-Porter even supports a balanced budget amendment. Secondly, I heard her blame George Bush. I mean, we're 6 years removed from George Bush. So why don't we focus on today and the future? Third, you said, thankfully, that I didn't vote for that tax hike, which was the last vote that I took. My question would be, would you have voted for that tax hike? You were saying that that tax hike is the reason that the budget deficit is declining. Would you have voted for that tax hike?
It's one of the reasons that is declining. And yes, I would vote to tax the top 1%.
So you would have voted for that bill?
I agree with Warren Buffett, who's in that group, who says that it's not fair that a secretary pays more.
Would you have voted for that bill?
Said yes. Yeah.
So you would have voted for that bill. It actually increased taxes on the middle class, the very group of people that you claim that you want to support.
No, it didn't. It didn't, Frank.
I will move to the minimum wage, which sort of ties into this as well. Frank Guinta, what is your position with regard to the size of the minimum wage set by the federal government and what the role is of cities, states, as well as the federal government in the minimum wage?
Sure. States should have their ability to set their own minimum wage standards if they so choose. Local control is something that I think we all feel is important in New Hampshire, regardless of what your ideology is, your political affiliation. I again go to the CBO report that said if you again force another mandate on small business, which drives our economy more than 90% here in the Granite State, you would have a minimum of 500,000 jobs lost, and it could be as high as 1 million. Here's what I would do, and this is a very, I think, simple solution. I want to see wages for everyone raised. Let's focus on everyone who is in the workforce, and then also try to encourage more people into the workforce. A very simple solution. Give a tax credit to any employer that either raises the pay of an existing employee, or if they hire a new employee. Allow that small business owner to make the decision based on their abilities, their financial abilities, and you will see pay raises for everyone in America by incenting small business owners and risk takers, not by mandating it and penalizing them.
Thank you. Carol Shea-Porter, can you talk about the minimum wage and specifically the role of the different levels of government in the minimum wage?
I can. I just want to say that when Frank voted for the sequester, what happened there was it got our credit rating lowered and took us right over almost to the fiscal cliff. So that's been very expensive on this country when we got our credit rating lowered. But as for minimum wage, I think I just heard Frank Guinta say that there shouldn't be one. Can you imagine?
No, I didn't say that.
That the states...
I didn't say anything remotely like that.
Well, we'll have to go back and look. But there should be a minimum wage. And the problem here is that if it's not a reasonable minimum wage, then the taxpayers wind up paying for services for people. If people are working full-time and 2 jobs and the wage isn't large enough, then they have to go and receive benefits. And who pays those benefits? The taxpayers, and the middle-class taxpayers get whacked with that. So you have to have a reasonable minimum wage there to support our economy. Also, we know that when people have money and they live closer to the edge, they're not sending their money off to Europe. They are spending their money right here in communities with local businesses. And so if people have wages and they are able to go out, they will go and go to the pizza place. They will go and get their child some shoes. They will go locally and purchase items there, which helps small businesses, helps Main Street.
Thank you. Carol Shea-Porter, what is a vegetable you simply cannot eat?
Corn.
Corn?
Right.
Really? Write that down, people. Frank Guinta, what's a vegetable you can't
I am very pro-vegetable. I got to tell you, I love vegetables. We have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and there is no way I can say which one we're not going to eat because I'll hear that tonight from them.
Wow. I find that extremely
the reality
informative.
is if I ate corn, I'd wind up in the hospital. So I'm happy for you that you can grow a full vegetable garden.
Very good. Thank you. I am always amazed at the answers to these questions.
I'm amazed at the questions.
Yeah, well, you did describe me as...
That's George for you.
Yeah, you did describe me as the most interesting moderator. You didn't say best, you just said the most interesting.
I think you just proved it, George.
I think I did. There's no question about it. Let's talk about foreign affairs for a minute. I'm going to go to Carol Shea-Porter. The events in the Middle East, the rise of ISIS or ISIL, however you might choose to refer to it, has created terrible concerns and problems in the United States and across the world, certainly in the Mideast. What are we doing in the Mideast with regard to ISIS, ISIL, and what are we trying to accomplish there? And what do you think your role as a Congresswoman is and should be with regard to this topic?
Well, we've had a number of hearings on the Armed Services Committee about this, and everybody knows that there are numerous challenges to that area. For example, Syria is in a full-blown crisis because they're in the middle of a civil war. And so we were hoping that Turkey would take on, in some way, put troops, do something to help. And what Turkey did this week was they actually attacked the Kurds, and the Kurds are the ones that are, we think, responsible fighters and that will actually, take on ISIL. We saw what happened in Iraq after all that money and all that treasure and all that our great men and women did there, that the Iraqi soldiers just left the equipment. So our problem here is that all of these groups keep changing alliances and allegiances weekly, daily. So we only have a couple of options there. We need to press the countries in the region to provide ground troops, and we need to build up that coalition, which is happening, I'm happy to say, but Turkey needs to be a full partner in that, because geographically they're the most threatened.
Please take an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you.
Yes.
But the whole world is threatened by this. So I support the airstrikes. I support financial support there. I will say that the military, because of the sequester that Frank voted for, has been coming to us saying that we're not prepared to do what we need to do. So we obviously have to put more money into this now. But when we build that coalition, the other thing we need to do is get the tribes, the Sunni tribes, to try to peel them away from ISIL. And we did that in Iraq, and my hope is that we'll be able to do that again and be able to work with Iraq to build their military up again. We saw a problem with their leader. He's now gone, Karzai, and hopefully we'll see more fairness with the Shia government towards the Sunnis, and that will bring more Sunni fighters willing to take on ISIL. But it's going to be protracted, and it is going to cost money, and we do have to continue those airstrikes, continue to build up that coalition, and urge those countries to put troops on the ground, not ours. The other thing is that I think we need to change our language. We keep saying Saudi Arabia is helping us, Jordan's helping us. No, we are helping them. This is their region, and we are helping them.
Okay, thank you. And you did take a full 2 minutes. I also probably rushed you a little bit, and you said Karzai instead of Maliki, who I think you were referring to there.
Right.
And if I could give Frank Guinta a full 2 minutes to respond to the question, what are we doing about ISIS, and what are we trying to accomplish with regard to ISIS?
Well, Carol sits on the House Armed Services Committee, which again is the Committee of Jurisdiction. And if I know how government works and the process works, you probably received classified briefings over a year ago. And if you didn't, that means you missed them. And we should have been addressing this a year ago. I didn't hear anything from you, quite frankly, until now, about what your thoughts are relative to ISIS. Number one, there needs to be a congressional vote. The President of the United States I think most people view this as a war. So there needs to be, under the War Powers Act, a vote by Congress, whether we should be in this conflict or not. What that would require is the President providing an actual plan and something specific that not just members of Congress can see, but every American. It's very important that we are transparent with the country about the plan, the objective, and what the long-term obligations of the United States are going to be. We haven't seen that. And I am shocked that you would sit on the Committee of Jurisdiction and not demand that prior to taking the vote on Syria. And I'm shocked that you wouldn't be demanding that now. Secondly, there has to be an immediate coalition of the willing in the region. This is a fight that the region has to understand and has to undertake. There are terrorists in the region that need to be eliminated. ISIS very clearly needs to be eliminated. They are killing Americans. They're doing it in the most inhumane way possible. Jim Foley's family is from Rochester. This is a deeply emotional issue for the country and for New Hampshire as a result of that. So we need to have clear delineation from the President, leadership from the President to create a willing coalition of boots on the ground, and the airstrikes that we have are just a start, but clearly not getting us to where I think we need to be in terms of eliminating ISIS as a threat.
Let's go to Ukraine.
Could I have a minute to correct what he just said about me?
Let's take an additional 30 seconds on both parties.
Thank you. Number one, we do need a vote. I did ask the chairman to come back from his trip so that we could have a meeting on ISIL. The chairman is Republican. The House is run by Republicans. We're only there 2 days a week, so it's hard to get things done. But this had to be done. And I did write a letter asking the chairman, Buck McKeon, to come back so that we could have that vote. I have demanded that. And the reality is that the Armed Services Committee is under the jurisdiction of a chairman. As I'm sure you're aware, each one has a chairman, every committee has a chairman. It's a Republican chairman named Buck McKeon. And while I can write to him and I can speak to him, I can't make him do anything.
30 more seconds, Frank Guinta.
Well, look, when you serve in Congress, I don't think people want to hear excuses. I mean, you serve on the Committee of Jurisdiction. Don't you have an obligation to work with members of the committee while you serve in Congress to try to get things accomplished? You're the member of Congress right now. I'm not. You've served for 6 years. You know the process. You should be able to try to, at least when you're on the Committee of Jurisdiction, advocate what a clear position is for yourself and for the President, and you haven't been able to do that.
So we are bombing in the Middle East, but we're not doing very much at all militarily in the area of Russia, the Ukraine, the country of Georgia, and so on. We're essentially allowing Russia to establish itself wherever it wants, taking over the Crimea and placing troops in eastern Ukraine. What's the role of the United States, in 1 minute, when it comes to Ukraine and reining in the expansionist activity of Vladimir Putin?
I think what's happening over there is a disservice to the Ukrainian people. I am part Polish. I'm a Tchaikovsky. When the President of the United States took the missile defense system out of Poland, it sent the wrong message to the country of Poland, and it sent a wrong message to the entire region. When the President talked with Medvedev and said a couple of years ago now, wait until after the election, I'll have more flexibility. We're seeing what flexibility he asked for. Putin is taken over Crimea. There's concern that he'll take over all of Ukraine and other countries in the region. The number one thing we can do, export energy. Take away the number one hammer that Putin has, which is the energy reliance that Europe has on Russia. But again, we're not doing that to the extent that we should be. That's because someone like Carol Shea-Porter doesn't support, an all-of-the-above energy plan. And again, you serve on the Committee of Jurisdiction, and we haven't heard anything substantive over the last year on Crimea or Ukraine or the middle or the foreign or the area that we're talking about. And that's the frustration I think with people have. When you come home to New Hampshire, you have an obligation to talk with people and tell them where you stand and what you're trying to accomplish.
In 90 seconds or so, if you could talk a little bit about Ukraine, Russia, and reining in Russian ambitions.
Okay, well, it's always fun to remember certain things that Frank Guinta said when he was in Congress, such as, we're only 1/3 of the government. We can't get anything done because we have the House, but we don't have the Senate, and we don't have the White House. So, Frank, I think people are smart enough to understand that, we are 1/3 there, and that we have to have the Senate and the White House there. So you really shouldn't try to blame any group. But let me say that another big problem that this country is facing, and I do know this because I am on the Committee of Jurisdiction, is that sequester hurt the military. And we just heard Chuck Hagel say it again, and we've heard it over and over again as I've traveled. The sequester hurt the military. It hurt our readiness, and Frank, you voted that. So you're anxious to do more, but you have to have proper funding for this. So make sure that your arguments are consistent here, because you can't have a sequester and you can't build what you need to do. Now, we've had a number of economic sanctions in that region, and I think they are feeling the pressure, but there is also the ethnic problem that we have there, in that area there are many ethnic Russians. And I was reading, I think in the New York Times recently, about the split in families, not just in our own vision, but in families, about which side they're aligning on. So I believe, and always have felt, that we need to keep an eye on that region. When we were pivoting towards the Pacific, I said I didn't think that was a good idea, I felt we needed to also make sure that Russia does not return to it. So, and we're watching closely. But are you saying you support military action right now? Because short of anything else, the sanctions, the next step has to be military action. Are you supporting military action in Ukraine?
Why don't you take 1 minute to speak with regard to specific actions you would take in the area of the Ukraine?
And I'll reiterate what I said in my earlier remark. The next action doesn't have to be military action, Carol. It can be economic action through our energy policy. You just said that the sanctions are working. I don't think anyone in America thinks the sanctions are working. Putin continues to move into Ukraine. These sanctions are not working. So if we provided energy to Europe, Europe would have the capability to stand up to Putin because they are reliant on Russia for energy, for gas. That is a very simple solution that doesn't require any military action, doesn't require American boots on the ground. It's a thoughtful, logical approach to dealing with someone who is a very Cold War-like thinker in Vladimir Putin.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up to that, 30 seconds? Can the United States cost-effectively deliver energy to Western Europe in any way that's financially comparable to what a pipeline running right from Russia into Western Europe is able to deliver? How could we possibly compete with the pricing that Russia delivers?
I think the more opportunity we put on the markets for energy, the cheaper the cost is going to be. And I think European nations will consider all different avenues of energy options for themselves. That is what a number of leaders in Europe have called for, including Germany. So, let's partner with them economically to strengthen our economy, to help them with a real Cold War threat that they have in the region.
And if you wouldn't mind adding 30 more seconds.
I wouldn't, and that's exactly what we're doing. So I think you have the right idea to partner with them. So here's what I'm interested in. We know the United States needs energy as well, and we have not invested in renewable energy like we should. Europe has invested in renewable energy, but we have not. So you want us to give up our natural gas and send it over there? What happens?
No, I didn't say that.
Well, if we're selling to them, I don't really understand what your
Let
energy
let me
policy
ask a very
is.
specific question. I'll ask you to respond to it first. Is there not a law that essentially bans United States energy companies from selling our gas and oil outside the country? No, we have to keep it internal because we want to be energy independent. What is your position on that law?
Yes, with some exceptions. Alaska, for example, puts the oil into the international market, into Japan. But no, I think that we need to be very careful about our own energy needs. We don't know. This is a fairly unstable world. We're seeing a lot of issues there. So we need to protect our energy so we can protect our businesses and protect our citizens.
Thank you. 30 seconds more, if you would, on the general topic of that piece of legislation that essentially now bans us from doing what you were proposing, which would be offering that energy to us.
I think it's very simple. I think if you explore here in America in the different alternative energy opportunities that we have, we can be self-reliant, which I think every American wants to be, number one. Number two, the more we're capable of exploring and producing, the greater likelihood that we can export, which is a revenue source for the United States, and it provides stabilized governments in Europe. It seems to me a win-win, but I don't think Carol supports that notion. It's clear that you don't support the Keystone Pipeline, and union families across the country support it, Republicans support it, Democrats support it. It concerns me that you tend to look at a very narrow view of energy when it is such an important, critical component to our safety, our security, and our economy.
Let's stay on that for another full minute. What's the right balance between our energy needs and using energy strategically as well as economically and environmental concerns, specifically concerns around fracking and the impact on groundwater, Keystone Pipeline, and Northern Pass? Could you comment on all three of those and the role of all three of those in making us as energy independent and strong as possible?
I think you need to try to strike a balance with respect to the regulatory requirements. We in New Hampshire appreciate our environment. We're in a wonderful part of our state. We don't want to see that diminished or minimized. But we also, on the other hand, understand that we have the highest energy prices here in New Hampshire in America, and that there's got to be a middle ground so families can afford the cost of energy. Just 2 weeks ago, Liberty Utilities announced a 47% increase, which they said was $50 per month for the average household. Think about that in the context of Carol Shea-Porter's support of the national energy tax, cap and trade, which was going to be $2,500 a year. Imagine a family today under Carol Shea-Porter's plan of a national energy tax having to pay the $2,500 plus the $50 per month. Something has to be done to minimize that impact on families and small business owners here in the Granite State.
I hope you had your fingers crossed when you used those numbers.
Well, please, if you'd
Okay.
speak for 1 minute on the topic.
Well, let me say that Frank has blocked any efforts to create renewable energy. And while I'm sure the Koch brothers who are funding you are very happy to hear you talk about, Keystone, and Democrats are against it, Republicans are, that's not true. This is not falling along Democrat and Republican lines. It's falling, ranchers, middle-class ranchers don't want this. In Texas, they've been fighting with environmentalists against this. The Keystone Pipeline, the problem with it is this oil goes on the international market. It comes through our land. And if there's a spill, they're not in the oil liability fund and they're not responsible for it. So it comes across our land, across ranches, across farmland, across people's private property, and they would be stuck if there were a spill because this is not like regular oil either. This is very, very heavy bitumen. So, and then it gets processed at Port Arthur and goes onto the international market. So my question to you, Frank, is did you know that oil would go on the international market where we would have to compete with international prices?
And we're going to come back to Frank, have the opportunity to respond if he chooses to that, but I'm going to stay on energy a little bit longer and ask you to spend another minute specifically on the combination of energy and the environment. Do you accept that climate change is occurring, that the Earth is getting warmer, number one? Number two, do you believe that human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels, is a significant contributor to it? And number three, what would you do about it, including things that might add to the cost of our energy?
Right. Well, first of all, of course I believe it. I mean, 800 climate scientists have said this. It's at universities, and it's also the military preparing for it. When the military is preparing papers about how this could cause unrest if the climate changes, there'll be some areas that don't have as much food or more food, and the waters will rise. We're seeing, we get our feet wet along the and sunny days, by the way, along our seacoast. So yes, it is happening. So I do support the all of the above energy policy because we don't have any choice right now. We do need all of the above, but we should be working, and I call for an Apollo-type program. I called for that in '06 and have been pushing this. We need to have an Apollo-type program to address these problems and create our energy. Germany did. Now, Germany, everybody who's been there knows it's cloudy and rainy, and yet they are using renewable energy, and other European nations in a very big way. And right from the beginning, we were told that we could do this, that we would be able, using solar and using everything else available, wind, everything, that we could do this. I think stalling on this issue is a pending disaster if we don't get going. And yes, it does call for
And
some
another 30
investment.
seconds specifically talking about the cost to us who are paying a lot for energy. How much more are you willing to have us pay in order to reduce the impact of greenhouse gases?
Well, there are a number of ways to pay. You don't have to take it from somebody's payroll. You don't have to take it that way at all. You can, and we should, be looking, for example, I know that we could just pass a very, very tiny trading tax on Wall Street, just for the very large institutional traders, not for people that have retirement money, but for the huge ones, the speculators that trade very quickly. It's just an idea that's been out there, offered by Republicans as well as Democrats. So we don't have to say exactly how. First, we have to say that we will, and then we get to how. But I think when you look at what the cost is already to this country, take a look at what we're paying. We see tornadoes, we see hurricanes, we see floods. I was down at Katrina, volunteered there. All of these are saying that we're having climate change, and we are paying, really paying now for this. So we've got to get on this. And I think that most of us, I know that Frank doesn't think there's human-caused trade, but I think most of us do.
Let's hear what you think. Specifically, is the Earth getting warmer? Is human activity a significant contributor to that? And if so, what, if anything, should we do about it? 1 minute, and then I'll follow up.
Sure. Well, I think most people feel like the climate is always changing, I'm not sure that what Carol said about the 800 scientists is accurate. There is a whole host of people within the scientific community that have different opinions on this. But if you want to talk about the worst offenders, why don't we look at India and China and what's going on with their polluting and what's going on with their requirements, and try to bring them into the mix. I want to go back, though, to what Carol said. She said that she is for an all-of-the-above energy policy. No, you're not, because you oppose Keystone. Number two, you said you want an Apollo-type program. Have you, since '06 you've been saying this, you said that just now. Have you ever filed a piece of legislation that is an Apollo-type program for energy? Because I haven't seen it. You keep talking about this, but you don't give any specifics on what you've done or what you think you can do, and you've served us 6 years.
Well,
We'll come back. And so you would not take any action today that would add to the cost of energy with a goal of reducing greenhouse gases, number one. And number two, specifically, what is your position with regard to non-buried lines associated with Northern Pass?
I think Northern Pass needs to listen to the people of New Hampshire, and New Hampshire has clearly stated that they would like to see more of the line buried. I think that there's a middle ground that can be found there, and I hope that that does happen, that there is a middle ground found.
How is that different from Keystone and folks in the Midwest who don't want the pipeline running through their neighborhoods? Why shouldn't we be responding to them just as we would respond to New Hampshire?
Well, you can respond to them like we are responding to people in New Hampshire, but the blind opposition to Keystone has hurt middle-class families. It has hurt union families. We're talking about $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year jobs And this has been under study now for years and years and years. I mean, it's very, very simple. The president could say yes. You deal with job creation, and you deal with energy resources that are desperately needed here and possibly to export. But again, I'd like to know if Carol has proposed an Apollo-like program, because she keeps calling for it, but I'd like to know what the legislation is that you filed.
And I'll ask you within 30 seconds to also respond to very specifically your positions on both Northern Pass, what should be buried, whether it should be allowed if it's not being buried, and Keystone Pipeline.
Okay, thank you. First of all, when you were on Channel 9 with Josh, and he brought up the 800 climate change scientists, you didn't say, oh, I didn't know anything about that. What you said was, well, just because liberal Democrats, and when he said you don't believe 800 climate change scientists, then you went on to say, well, you have to look at their politics. So you were suggesting that somehow or another the science is just about politics. And I think that's a risky position, even if you're not sure. I think it's a risky position to take right now when we're seeing so much happening, that we should address it. And I did pass, as you know, and it died in the Senate, but an energy bill that incorporated so much of what I wanted to see in there, that we would actually have an energy plan that would address
What
our
year was
problems.
that?
It was 2008, I think, or 9, and it was called ACE. So you could look that up, and it was a good one, but it didn't make it through, and I regret that, because I do think it would be very, very helpful if we had a comprehensive energy plan. The other part is, I do think we should bury...
Oh,
want me to stay with?
Another 30 seconds then, I guess, with regard, we would like
Okay.
to hear your position specifically if you're actually opposed to the Keystone Pipeline, and your position with regard to Northern Pass.
Yes. Northern Pass, I think they should bury it under the ground, and they have the capacity to do that. As for Keystone, I said the problem with the Keystone Pipeline, and I'll repeat it again, is that this is oil, this is coming from Canada, this is bitumen coming from Canada, Koch brothers, coming across our country, but not for us. Okay, but if it spills along the way, the companies are not responsible. It travels, and we've seen the spills, then it travels to Port Arthur, Texas, where it gets refined and put on the world market. So tell me what the United States gets out of this, and if you can say the United States gets something from it, then, we can talk, but there's no gain for us.
I'm sorry. My neighbors and I have strong opinions about all these topics that you folks are talking about, but we really are
That's
here
good.
to hear from, it is good, but we really want to hear from these folks. We're trying to leave here smarter with regard to the two candidates we're going to have to choose from on November 4th. So I'm going to ask you to listen to what they have to say. Squirm in your seat, but don't make any noise. That's acceptable. Frank Guinta, you get 30 more seconds, and then I am done talking about energy at this point. And specifically, if you could comment on the Keystone Pipeline and the fact that that is not necessarily energy net gain for the United States.
Well, Carol said, what are the benefits? The benefits are net job creation, upwards of almost $90,000 a year jobs, exporting opportunities, which is more revenue for the United States, and greater energy stability here and internationally. Those are pretty important things. And by the way, it's not just Republicans who want this. Unions are demanding this. They're needing it because they're looking for jobs. And I know that the unions support you quite a bit, Carol, but I know that they're also frustrated that you refuse to support this. They are working with members on both sides of the aisle to try to get the support for the Keystone Pipeline, because it's about the economy and it's about energy independence.
Frank Guinta, what was the first car you ever owned?
Buick Skylark.
What year? Do you remember what year it was?
Oh, goodness. It was pretty ugly, I got to say. It must have been, an 80...
Goodness.
You're
just so young.
I think it was in the 80s.
But a Buick Skylark, that is bad taste, Frank Guinta. Carol Shea-Porter, what was the first car you owned?
I couldn't afford one. I put myself through college working in factories and jobs. I married my husband and got the car. So that's how it worked. So it was a red Mustang.
Wow, okay. You clearly didn't marry as well, so no, I'm sure you married wonderfully. I'm not making any judgment about anyone's spouse.
Wait a minute, he was an Army lieutenant. I don't want you to think he had a lot of
Okay,
money or
well,
anything.
Red Mustang, though, cool. The topic of privacy was very big in our headlines a year or so ago when Mr. Snowden and Private Manning and others were delivering to us lots of information about what our government was doing in secret. Specifically, questions with regard to phone calls, at least the metadata, who we called, how long that call lasted, and so on. Emails, reading through emails with software that was smart enough to look for keywords and so on, and then examining those emails in more detail after those were found, not just domestically and doing it throughout the United States, but throughout the world, right to the point of bugging the phone of the Chancellor of Germany. What should the United States government be doing more of, less of? What kind of legislation should be in place, and if any, that would add additional protections to our privacy? Carol Shea-Porter, 1 minute.
Well, first I voted against pretty much everything that was there, FISA, et cetera, because I never felt like it protected Americans' rights to privacy. I think that is absolutely paramount. If you're not doing anything wrong, you should not be investigated, and they should have to have a warrant. And it's very different from Frank's votes on this. I also went along with when we found out all the metadata information, Justin Amash amendment, which would rein them in. Also, I would never have voted like Frank Guinta did he voted, Ed Perlmutter, who's a Democrat, tried to at least protect the passwords and say that companies couldn't ask for passwords for Facebook, and he voted no on that. And he also, when he had a chance to say that and you could have sided with the librarians here, but Jerry Nadler's amendment has said that the government can't get the library records, and you voted no on that as well. So every time you've had a chance to protect our rights to privacy, I think you have failed the American people.
Frank Guinta, 1 minute on privacy rights and these various issues.
You know, look, privacy rights are extremely important to Americans, and they should be, because this administration has been violating and abusing the existing law, and the NSA is the perfect example of it. No member of Congress, Republican or Democrat, voted to allow the NSA to do what they did. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. No Republican, no Democrat. The NSA went beyond the legal authority, as did this administration. Secondly, I know Carol likes to attack me on this issue and talk about two liberal amendments that were proposed. I voted for 7 different amendments by Justin Amash, who you actually just referenced, to protect the very issues that you reference. Beyond that, there does need to be a greater level of oversight by Congress, because clearly the administration is breaking the law. You need a civil liberties board to make sure that people are protected. You need greater transparency in what's going on, and you need greater specificity in the language, because when the language is written, they are taking a lot of liberal assumptions in the specific language that Congress is passing. So that is happening now, and it should happen again in the next Congress.
He went over. Could I comment? I just want to say that you were in Congress. Why didn't you do that?
I did. I voted for a number of the 7 different amendments that you were referencing from Justin Amash.
Saying there should be a board, there should be this, there should be that. Why didn't you do that?
Because at the time, the violation didn't happen. Since the violation by the NSA happened, Congress is acting.
I knew they were violating all along. That's why I kept voting no.
Thank you. I think we have good information about where you stand
You
on
knew all
this
along they
particular
were
topic.
violating the law?
Thank you.
I knew we were
Thank you.
along
Thank
they
you
were
both.
violating
Nope,
the
you're
law?
both done. Both done. Oh, Madison Town Meeting coming alive. Thank you. And I do think we have a good understanding of where you both stand on this issue. Let's talk about illegal immigration for a minute, Frank Guinta. And I'm going to ask a very specific question. I'm going to try it a little different. I'm going to personalize it a little bit myself. So I have a daughter who is teaching high school in Portland, Oregon, not exactly the center area of illegal immigration. And she had a 17-year-old girl come to her whose mother had just been arrested at her place of employment for being in the country illegally. And the girl explained to my daughter that she was brought into this country when she was 6 months old. She is a high school junior. She is a good student, looking forward to going to college. And she can't go home because ICE folks are at her home waiting for her to take her into custody. And she asked my daughter what she should do, and we don't need to play out that case. What would you do with that girl? What's the right thing to do? How do we treat that girl who entered this country illegally at the age of 6 months, is now 17 years old, speaks very little Spanish, and came from the country of Guatemala, where her mother felt she had to leave for her safety?
George, people want to come to our country because it's the greatest country in the world. My family immigrated here legally. I've got great friends who immigrated here legally. And we have, I think, the greatest opportunity for Americans and for future Americans to achieve their hopes and their dreams. The challenge that we have is that the border has not been secure for years. We don't know who is coming across the border. There is encouragement of illegal border crossings. The DACA order that the President issued and has since reissued has allowed more than 300,000 people to cross the border. And now we're in a context of this where we don't know how people who may want to attack America are gaining entry to America. So again, there are so many issues that we've got to address. I'd like to try to address them and depoliticize these things and try to look at them in a more subjective and logical manner.
Well, let's take 30 more seconds on
thank
this.
you. We do have to.
But I'm going to follow up.
Sure. I'm sure you will.
Specifically, what would I do with Angela with regard to her? There are two aspects to this. One is the security of the border, and the other aspect is what do we do with 10, 11, 12 million people who are in the country illegally? What do we do with Angela?
Angela never should have been in that situation in the first place.
Agreed.
Okay, she never should have been in that situation in the first place. And if we had a proper approach to legal immigration in this country, Angela would never be in that situation. So here's what I would do. We've got to stop the ongoing illegal immigration into the country. Let's at least start with making sure that no more people enter the country illegally. And that means you've got to have a border security immediately. That's not just for immigration purposes, it's for safety and security purposes.
Thank you. Carol Shea-Porter, I have in-laws who I don't love as much as I love my daughter in Portland, Oregon, but I have very nice in-laws who lived up until very recently in El Paso, Texas. And they moved from El Paso, Texas. They moved for two reasons. One is the cost of living in El Paso, and specifically property taxes and costs associated with health care are driven up very significantly by the number of illegal immigrants that live in that area. They also left for reasons of safety. The amount of crime that was occurring in their neighborhood, in their area that hadn't been particularly problematic, had risen very substantially. They had to move from there because so many people were coming into this country illegally, and that the border there is so difficult to police. What would you do about making it safer for people to live in El Paso, Texas, and less expensive, and how would you stem the tide of people coming into this country illegally?
As you know, this has been a problem for decades, and I have voted to improve the money for the borders and taken the steps that we can take. We need to do more, though. I mean, clearly we can't have so many people coming in and keep them here. So we have it has to be a multi-pronged approach, though. First of all, we have to penalize employers so that they know there's no job. I mean, the employers have to really feel the heat. So there's no job, which will help to stem that. Then people come in, well, let's talk about the children, because Frank was talking about DACA, which is Deferred Action for Children Arrivals, and I know that you know, Frank, they're called the Dreamers. Those kids only could stay if they arrived before 2007, if they were going to school or they were in the military, going in the military, and they had no idea about what happened, right? And so that only is a very specific, very narrow band of people. Most of the people coming in right now need to be returned unless they qualify for asylum. Otherwise, they have to go back. We can't be an open border and have two ways to come in. One, you go through the legal process, and one, you just come over.
And
so
30 more seconds, but I'm going to again focus my question. What do we do specifically to make the border more secure?
Well, I think, first thing is we need to undo the sequester, which cut some of the funding for the borders. I mean, that was a huge mistake made by Frank Guinta and others. So we have to beef up the border. We have to have more security guards there. I think it would be smart of us to have a consulate in places where we're getting a flow of people that might or might not qualify for refugee status, so they don't come here, and then we decide. I think we should stop them right in their own countries. I think more crime enforcement, police enforcement along the borders. So we do. I think everybody, Republican and Democrat, agrees that we need to protect our borders more.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Carol Shea-Porter a question with regard to the Supreme Court decisions that have occurred recently that have essentially applied the Bill of Rights to individuals, to corporations. And the impact of those noticed in the Hobby Lobby case with regard to health care and also with regard to campaign funding. And specifically with regard to campaign funding, the right of free speech to corporations has really opened this up. Those of us who watch television in New Hampshire get to hear you and your surrogates, recognizing you can't coordinate your campaigns, say terrible things about each other, and you both seem much nicer than what your television ads say about each other. What is the role of the Congress in reining in the campaign spending that is occurring right now on a pretty much wide open basis?
Right. Well, it's awful. It's, Citizens United, and then the next decision opened this up. And John Boehner is about to drop $1.6 million on my head in the last couple of weeks for Frank. So clearly, I don't like this. I have signed on to every single piece of legislation saying at least make them say who they are, the Disclose Act. I don't believe that Frank has signed any legislation to stop this. I support a constitutional amendment to say that corporations aren't people and can't do this. So we have these shadowy groups. I did ask Frank at the beginning, like I asked him before, let's sign an agreement and say we don't want these third parties in here with this money, not running either way, and he would not do that. I think that would have been a big help. We saw that in Massachusetts when we had the Warren race with the Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown. So I think it would have been a good idea if we had signed on to something to slow it down. But, it is what it is at this moment. But we need a constitutional amendment. We need campaign finance reform desperately. And I hope that Frank will join me in pushing for this because it is disgusting.
This is very simple, George. I mean, Carol, you have control over the ads that you run. This notion that we need campaign finance reform solely to stop you from running negative ads, it doesn't make any sense. Within 12 hours after the Republican primary was over, you were hitting me with a negative ad. I'm running one ad right now, and it's positive. We can control what we can control. And you have chosen during this campaign to go negative in every single aspect. And I think it's because you don't want to talk about the record of success that you have, because I don't think it exists. 6 years in Congress, and you have not contributed to the benefit of the state of New Hampshire's economy. You have grown the size and scope of government. You have voted for every possible tax hike that has come before you. And I think these negative ads are used to distract from a record. People, I think, want substance, policy, and they want an elections based on merit. So I'm glad that we have forums like this to talk about the issues, but it would be nice if you, instead of saying it's someone else's fault, control your own campaign by talking about positive things rather than, bashing me with your negative ads.
I'm going to follow up on that and ask you to respond first in 30 seconds. Would you disavow the negative ads that are run, recognizing you're not coordinating with them by the political action committees and super PACs and so on, that attack Carol Shea-Porter for her support of quote, first-class air travel paid for by tax money for congressional members, lifetime health care for Carol Shea-Porter and members of Congress, and her refusal to support the law that keeps Congress from being paid if they fail to pass a budget. Those are the kinds of negative attacks that some of your supporters are sending out on her behalf.
Look, I think we should have debates and campaigns based on policy and substance. We should be talking about issues. We shouldn't be attacking people personally. We should be focusing on issues. I would love to see no negative ads, no negative mailers, just everything on policy and substance. But what you just mentioned, it sounds like Carol voted for. You voted for to allow yourself first-class travel. You voted for lifetime health care for members. And you voted against no pay, no budget. Those are votes that she did take.
Are we timing this? This is going to be a long answer.
It doesn't have to be a long answer. It can be very matter of fact. But in particular, would you disavow the ads that are being run attacking Frank Guinta for specifically corruption?
Well, let's start with the first. I don't mind if Frank Guinta runs ads. They're misleading. He did vote against all the stuff he's claiming in his ad that he'd support. But it was nice of you to acknowledge finally that there is pay disparity between men and women. You say you'll punish them, but you never actually got on any bill to do that. So I'm okay with your ads. Say what you want. What I'm not okay with, and I run my ads. We're not talking about your ads and my ads, and I know you know that. We're talking about the Koch brothers. We're talking about all the others. Let me say, you even have money coming towards you from Fred Malik, from the Nixon era. He was the one when Nixon asked him to count the number of Jewish employees in the Nixon administration at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These are bad hats, Frank, and you and I both know that. And you may say that you're not involved and you want to run an issue just on policy. But you are giving computer money to a group that goes around attacking me. You bought computers for them, and if you need to find it in the FEC filing, I will help you. So, and that's a fact. So the reality is that, yes, I would ask these groups not to come in, and you should ask these groups not to come in.
Thank you.
But I'm okay with your ads, and you should be okay with mine.
Well,
And by the way, all those votes that you're claiming, they were all in the Ryan budget, and I voted no for the Ryan budget, of course.
I clearly improved the quality of the debate by asking that question and deserve full credit. We are reaching near the end, but there is a topic, Carol Shea-Porter, that I can't not bring up, which is the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Again, I'm going to ask a very specific question. What must be changed in the Affordable Care Act for it to be a more effective, successful, productive piece of legislation?
Well, first let me say I'm fine with you bringing up the Affordable Care Act because for the first time people who had no insurance have health insurance. It's a huge difference, and I'm proud that happened. Now, there are some things that need to be fixed, but let's talk about what's good first.
No. That's what poor Frank Guinta is going to have to come up with.
Okay.
You're going to have to talk about what's wrong with it.
One of the things that needs to be fixed, and I did vote just before we left the House to fix it, is that we need to change the definition of what a full-time employee is. It's set at 30 hours, and that's too low.
Thank you. And that was it.
Oh, there's other things that need to be fixed as
what
well.
else would you improve upon?
I think that we need to focus more on small businesses. I think we need some legislative fixes, but unfortunately, all they want to do is vote to repeal it. So I'd like to see us work together so that we can fix that. So, yeah, of course, and we expected that. When I voted for this, I said, you know, this is like pushing a train out of a station. There'll be many, many stops along the way to the destination. But Republican presidents and Democratic presidents had tried to pass health care for people, and I'm very pleased that we were able to do that.
Thank you. Frank Guinta, what aspects of the Affordable Care Act of Obamacare would you like to see remaining in place?
Well, the two specific provisions that I've written about that I think can be part of a solution moving forward are the things that I've listened to people about the most. The limits and allowing kids to stay on their parents' insurance until age 26. But I think the larger question...
I'm sorry, what do you mean by the limits? You said two items, the kids staying on until 26.
The caps, removing the caps, pre-existing condition issue.
Well, two different things. So the caps in terms of the maximum amount that would be paid.
Correct.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay. So, but I think I heard Carol say that she, is proud of the fact that she voted for the Affordable Care Act. It's been here for 4 years. We've had more than 22,000 people in the state of New Hampshire lose their insurance as a result. People then having to go on Obamacare by force, paying a higher premium, and having less access, particularly in Rochester, where Frisbee is not part of the exchange, and Portsmouth Hospital, which is not part of the exchange. two important areas in our district. I don't think it's a law that has worked to provide more access and more affordability. And the problem is Carroll always wants a mandated federal solution by government to fix the challenges and the problems. You don't need the government to fix everything. There is something called the free market that can work.
Thank you.
He went over. Could I answer that?
He did, and I am going to give you another
Okay.
30 seconds.
Thank you. First of all, stop repeating the 22,000 mantra, because people do know now that I worked with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they agreed to allow people to keep those policies for another year. So they didn't lose their policies if they signed up by December 19th. And I
talked
worked
to Blue
with
Cross,
Frisbee
they don't.
Hospital.
Let's let her
That's not what
finish.
they say to me.
I worked with Frisbee Hospital, and Al Fogger recently said in a newspaper, the CEO recently said that the Affordable Care Act has made insurance more affordable for many people and brought it, and provisions in the Affordable Care Act have made hospitals and doctors more efficient.
Thank you.
So I've worked with Al Fogger as well.
Thank you. We have come to that moment that breaks all of our hearts, which are the closing statements associated with the two candidates. And Frank Guinta is going to speak first. I'm going to grant you 90 seconds if needed. We have a little bit of time, and you might want to follow up on any of the topics that you didn't have an opportunity to fully explore. And then we'll go to Carol Shea-Porter. Please feel free to express your thoughts at the end of Frank Guinta's comments.
Well, thank you all very much for being here. Thank you to George for moderating. Look, I think it's an important part of the process here in New Hampshire for us to debate on the issues of the day and our visions for the country. I would like to earn your support on November 4th because I think we need different leadership in our state, in our district, in our country. We need to focusing on balancing our budget, eliminating our long-term debt so our kids and our grandkids are not saddled with it. Focus on economic growth in this country so every American has the opportunity for success. I want to see the next generation be just as successful, if not more, as the previous generation. And I don't feel like Americans get that sense based on the current leadership that we have. We've got 3 weeks left. We're going to continue to work hard and try to earn every opportunity to get your vote. But I will say one thing. I will be as accessible as I was as a mayor and when I served in Congress, because listening to you, the voters, is the most important thing. We can bring a New Hampshire approach to solving the challenges we face as a nation. And I thank you and look forward to earning your support.
Thank you. Thank you. Carol Shea-Porter, up to 90 seconds, please.
Thank you. This election's about fairness. As I have traveled around the district, meeting with constituents, holding town halls, talking to people about the issues that are challenging them and facing them, they're talking about fairness also. They feel like the American dream has gone off the rails, and they're very concerned about how we get back on. We get back on by doing what we always did, investing in this country and investing in each other. Look around you at the infrastructure. How many jobs could we create if we had a reasonable infrastructure program here and invested in that? It's important to do that. Investment in education, investment in research and development so we find the answers. It's in our DNA to solve the problems of this country, but it does call for an investment in each other. So these budget cuts that we saw under Frank Guinta's time and the Tea Party were very, very damaging to this country. We need a strong military. We need a strong national defense. One thing that I know is that because of the number of generals and others who have come to our committee, is that we need to make sure that we're able to answer any challenges around the world. And unfortunately, we're still struggling under that sequester. I was able to fix 1/3 of that sequester, but it will come back again in 2015. Different vision about education. I don't think we should be cutting Pell Grants to help kids go to school. I think that we need to help families educate their young. They are our future. There's all kinds of possibilities for them, but if we don't educate them, then we leave them behind and we create an underclass. It's not right, it's not fair. I also believe that we need a fair wage. We need to make sure we raise a minimum wage so families who are working so hard and holding 2 and 3 jobs have an opportunity to get into the American dream. It's simple. Americans just want to be able to go to work every day. They want to raise their families. They want to be able to pay their rent or pay their mortgage. They want to educate their children and save for retirement, have a little left on Friday night for pizza and a movie. I believe in that, too, and ask for your vote.
Thank you very much. Please don't move an inch. We are the only place these folks are going to debate where we actually give them a prize at the end. Appreciation. Carol Shea-Porter from Glass Graphics. These
Thank
are
you.
very,
Thank
very
you,
nice
Glass
and very nice
Graphics.
of Glass Graphics. Frank Guinta, this is for you. You actually get a certificate. And if you two would shake hands, we will all applaud.
Happily.
Thank you very much. Oh, very welcome.
Nice debate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go. Thank you all, and we'll see you on Halloween at 9 a.m. for the gubernatorial debate. Halloween.
Wow, really?
Thank you very much. Yes, you're very welcome. Thanks again.
My name is John Edgerton.